Chapter 7. Rabot fights the Campbells. That winter was harsh, as winters often are in the Arctic. By December, darkness covered the islands 22 hours of the day. The sun, half peaked over the ice-covered Barents Sea, made a brief journey across the southern horizon, and then the fleeting daylight ended with a bit of twilight. Between storms, the night gleamed with stars that reflected on the pure snow. At times, there would be such spectacular colored displays of northern lights, the aurora borealis, that it seemed as though the heavens were alive, dancing with the various colors. Loud, crackling sounds often accompanied the awesome sweep of the dancing fire across the sky. Because of the severe winter, food was scarce. Hunters from both villages on the island scoured the country and made treks far out on the dangerous ice each day, trying to find food to feed their families. The only sign of activity in the village was the government school, sitting near the ice-covered lake behind the sandpit on which the village nestled. Although the school had been built some years before, the Campbells were the first teachers to accept the isolated assignment. Yuki spent his days learning to read and write. His heart ached for Mr. Campbell, since the children were getting increasingly mean toward the two white people. Now they were also beginning to make fun of Yuki because of grandfather's friendship with the Campbells. The native people were naturally suspicious of the Campbells because of their painful experiences with the white whalers in the past. Rabot the shaman also continually sought to stir up hostility against the outsiders. Even normally quiet, respectful young Eskimos shouted at the Campbells to leave the island. One night, when the white couple was asleep, someone tried to set fire to their home. Rabot's power over the villagers was uncanny. Every time he had an opportunity, he used his influence to arouse the people's anger against the Campbells. At a gathering of the village elders one night, Rabot stood before the group and announced in a raspy voice, "The reason we have no food this winter is because we have allowed this foreign family to come to our island." He paused for dramatic effect, then continued his accusations. "The spirits are angry with us and will not forgive us until we in the village rid ourselves of these people and anyone who believes like they do." He glared at grandfather, who looked away with sadness in his eyes. Later that night, when the Campbells came to visit grandfather, Yuki listened intently from his bed. "Rabot is stirring up the village against you," grandfather said. "Constantly he tells the people that you are the cause for the lack of food and the bad winter. He says the spirits have withheld our food until the village rids itself of the evil white people. But there is no way to get off our island until the supply ship comes, which will not be until the summer months." Grandfather sat in deep thought. Then he softly added, "My friends, I fear for our lives." "Our God has sent us here," Mrs. Campbell replied. "He will not let harm come to us. This is a matter for our God. Our Father in heaven has 1,000 ways to take care of us and help the villagers find food. We will present the matter before him." There, in the quiet of the little house, the Campbells knelt with grandfather and presented their problem concerning Rabot to the Creator, the great Creator God. Yuki listened and wondered what would happen. Instead of improving things only continued to get worse. As Mr. Campbell walked through the village one stormy night, someone threw a jagged chunk of ice at him. Struck on the back of the head, he fell to the ground, blood streaming from the deep gash on his head. For a long time he lay in the snow, too weak to move. Then slowly, painfully rising to his feet, he staggered home. For the next 3 weeks, school remained closed as Mr. Campbell lay in bed. Mrs. Campbell nursed his wound and tended to him. Grandfather helped by taking care of the things necessary for their survival, until Mr. Campbell, looking pale and sickly, returned to teach his students. The young people met him with sullen stares. Again the Campbells came to grandfather's house for prayer. Yuki listened with a sad heart as the couple asked God not only for protection, but for a change of heart among the people. Mrs. Campbell prayed especially for Rabot. Yuki went to bed wondering about her prayer for Rabot. Why should they pray for him? He asked himself. He didn't deserve anything. The boy wondered what would happen next. As he huddled quietly on his bed, he thought of the strange story that Mr. Campbell had shared with him from the Bible. It was the tale of 3 young men who were willing to be burned up in a fiery furnace than to be disloyal to their God. Would the great Creator God protect the Campbells? The next evening, Yuki helped Grandfather feed the dogs. Yuki noticed Grandfather was deep in thought, so he didn't say anything. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped in front of them. A dark, sinister, hooded head appeared close to Grandfather. Then, in a deep voice, growled a warning from under the hood. If you continue to help the Campbells, the people of this village will have nothing to do with you. They will not speak to you. You will be as one dead. Heed my warning. Yuki shivered with fear as he listened to the voice. Then the shadowy figure disappeared in the darkness. Rabot, Grandfather muttered. How do you know? Yuki asked. He smells, Grandfather answered. In the middle of the night, about 1 week later, a loud knock on the door and the deep voice of Father calling Grandfather awakened Yuki. Come quickly. There's trouble. A chill ran through the boy. Had something terrible happened to the Campbells? Grabbing his clothes, he ran after Father and Grandfather. He heard Father yell to Grandfather as they ran, We're going to Rabot's house. On the way, they met other villagers, also hurrying to the shaman's little house on the edge of the settlement. As they pressed through the crowd into the house, Yuki saw Rabot lying on the floor, his head flung back and his arms outstretched. The boy thought he was dead. Grandfather knelt by his side and listened to the man's heart. Then he straightened up and motioned to Yuki. Go get the Campbells, he whispered in the boy's ear. In a few moments, Yuki returned with the white couple. Mrs. Campbell knelt by the side of the unconscious Rabot and listened to his heart and breathing. Then, pinching his nose, she blew large breaths of air into his mouth, stopping each moment or two to pump vigorously on his chest. By this time, people who wanted to see what had happened to Rabot, the powerful shaman, filled the house to overflowing. The air was hot and stuffy as Mrs. Campbell continued to work on the unconscious man. Sweat ran down her forehead as the minutes passed, and still Rabot showed no sign of life. Finally, Mr. Campbell spoke to the villagers in the crowded room. Rabot is in a very serious condition. His heart has stopped beating. A gasp ran through the people. It couldn't be. This was Rabot, the mighty miracle worker. Nothing bad could happen to such a powerful shaman. I would like to pray to my Creator God for Rabot to be healed, Mr. Campbell continued. He heard another gasp from the room. This was something that had never been done in the village. Bowing his head in the hushed room, Mr. Campbell prayed, Oh, my Creator God, it is you who gave life to this man in the beginning. It is you who has kept his life going all these years. Now I ask you to give him life again for the sake of these people, that they might believe you are the great Creator God who loves them. Thank you for hearing my prayer. The only sound in the room was the labored breathing from Mrs. Campbell as she continued working over Rabot. Everyone leaned forward to watch. Suddenly, Rabot gasped. He took several deep gulps of air as if he couldn't get enough. Then, opening his eyes, he looked up at the kind face of Mrs. Campbell. Color returned to his ashen skin. Mrs. Campbell patted Rabot's arm and said, "You're a very sick man, Rabot." Then, glancing around, she instructed those standing nearby, "Please bring me 2 poles and a blanket. Make a bed and carry him to my house. He will need constant care for a while." Once the crowd gasped, she was going to take care of Rabot, her enemy, in her own house? Several strong men left to carry out Mrs. Campbell's request. For the next 3 weeks, the Campbell house was the center of activity for the whole village, as people came to visit Rabot after all hours of the day and night. Mrs. Campbell rarely left his side, caring for his every need as she nursed him back to health. It was late in March before Rabot recovered enough to walk slowly around the village, leaning on a cane. But he was a changed man. He no longer did he curse the Campbells. When anyone said anything bad about them, he was quick to correct them. Often he repeated to the people of the village, "I was wrong. They are good people. I owe them my life."